Good morning. Good morning,
Good
everyone.
morning.
Good morning or afternoon,
That's true.
Afternoon.
somewhere.
Yeah, wherever you are. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, panel. Good morning, attendees. As usual, we're here to talk about or continue our discussions on change. Some change happens quickly, some change happens slowly. In our last conversation, what was that, a month or so ago, I think, we talked about business continuity planning and disruption. That was really mostly talking about change that might happen, storms and COVID, pandemics, et cetera, things that, might catch us off guard or take us by surprise. Today, we're going to talk about changes that are happening, things that we can be a little bit more prepared for and a little bit more, I don't want to say predictable, but, aware of, let's say. And, with the election now behind us, for example, and a new administration coming to term early next year, there are a number of changes we can expect in terms of, legislative and regulatory. We're going to talk a little bit more about those. Joining us today to talk about that are Aquella, Mandy, and Hope. And so first, if I could, let me get each of you all to briefly introduce yourselves, Aquella, and then Mandy, and then Hope, if you wouldn't mind, introduce yourselves. Tell us a little bit about your organization and your specialty, and then we'll continue.
Thank you, Steve. It's great to be back in the virtual roundtable. This is Aquella Hargrove, CEO for Alchemy Consulting Group, where we partner with organizations to help transform their workplace cultures. And we do that one business at a time. And we're based in Houston. And we do this across different industries globally.
Awesome. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I am Shamanda Joseph, also known as Mandy Joseph, and I am the founder of Tulip Advisory Professionals, LLC. At Tulip, we mitigate enterprise people risk to safeguard business outcomes. I lean on my employment law practice experience to look for breaches and anticipated breaches in the employer-employee relationship by centering the workforce experience as a lever for controlling risk. We put a 360-degree risk lens on people variables in the equation for protecting the bottom line. At Tulip, our acronym is Transforming Unmitigated and Undermitigated Liability into Positive Outcomes, and I am excited to participate in today's discussion.
Awesome. Hello, everyone. I am Hope Malvo. I'm the CEO of Bow Professional Services. So here at Bow, we focus on small to mid-sized companies, building workplace culture solutions for them that helps them increase productivity and increase profits. That's what we specialize in here at Bow. And I'm so happy to be here.
Awesome. Thank you all. And today I learned that TULIP is actually an acronym. Very cool. All right.
Not just a flower, Steve.
Right, exactly. So, Mandy, you recently wrote a post on LinkedIn talking about some of the changes that might be coming as a result of, the new administration, et cetera. Would you mind talking a little bit about those, please? Some of the changes that you're anticipating or expecting or seeing?
Yeah, so the post was really to encourage employers to start giving consideration to potential shifts in the legal and regulatory landscape with regard to people risk in the workplace following the election. So I created that post, I think, about a week after the election results came in, and I highlighted 5 employment law areas in particular to keep watch on as the transition takes place following the election. Those 5 areas were labor union rights, workplace and worker safety, pay practices, including pay equity, pay accuracy, and pay transparency. In addition, immigration is an area to keep an eye out on for changes. And then also artificial intelligence policy, which we know is all the rage right now, right? And given that the current administration just released an executive order just about a year ago, it's going to be interesting to see how modifications, maybe even rescinding what's in that policy may take shape as we move into a new cycle of governance at the federal level.
Nice. Thank you for that. I'm just shocked that we are now at the point where we're talking about artificial intelligence policy. It's a real necessary thing. I mean, it was the space of science fiction for so many years, and now we have to have policy surrounding it. So very cool. Yeah, thank you for that, Mandy. So, as you mentioned, leaders need to start looking at these spaces and monitoring them and watching for them, so they can prepare, their organizations and their organization's workforce, around those changes, basically, or for those changes. So, and we're calling that, future proofing, basically. How do you get your organization ready for what's coming, what might be coming, what is coming, et cetera. So when we think about future proofing, if I could, let me ask each of you all to just briefly describe what future proofing your workforce means to you, for your perspective, if you would, please. And let's go Arquella, Mandy, and then Hope again, please.
Yeah, great question, Steve. When you think about future proofing, right, it's just not about predicting the future, but it's how do we build our organizations so they're more resilient, they're more adapted. There's the adaptability, but also thinking of it, as our businesses are these immune systems where we are able to effectively respond to change and the challenges around AI and other technology disruptions and the economic shifts, regulatory changes that are going to be coming up for sure. So really thinking about it as it relates to our workforce development, as it relates to our infrastructure, as it relates to cultural agility, which I'm sure, again, Hope will speak on, strategic foresight, as well as what are those sustainable practices that we can start to apply within our businesses, especially for our clients that we serve in these spaces.
Excellent. Thank you. I'm so happy to hear you talk about strategic foresight. That's a topic I believe is really underutilized and under-discussed in leadership today. Thank you for that. Okay.
So future-proofing the workforce, I think, in addition to what Arquella has already shared, means understanding how to adjust ways of working and operating to avoid unnecessary impacts, including cost impacts, when change can be reasonably predicted. In other words, it's the ability to proactively mitigate risks from anticipated change impacts. And from a workforce perspective, I'd say it means centering people to discover the root cause or root causes to those change impacts on business outcomes. And when we talk about, as I highlighted, those 5 areas of potential impact on the legal and regulatory landscape, I want to emphasize that compliance is a minimum requirement. But fostering a workplace culture that is proactive, prepared, and prudent in the face of disruption is really the ultimate goal for future-proofing a workforce, whether it's in response to regulatory change or some other types of disruption.
Senator Tex.
Compliance is a minimum requirement. I love it.
I love that. I love that too. So as they've already, really outlined, it's really about being proactive rather than reactive. And really for me, it's about focusing on the people, the processes, technology, making sure they are aligned with long-term strategy. And what that looks like is creating a culture of resilience. The culture has to be adaptable, and we'll go over some things and some ways that can happen. But it's really about, as the workplace, the workforce grows, changes, evolves, there's going to be uncertainty, there's going to be change, there's going to be challenges. What systems are we creating? What strategies are we looking at? And what are we doing as it relates to making sure internally our workforce has created a resilient culture that's going to allow for those external disruptions? And how do you shift quickly? How are you looking at those regulatory changes? And how are you creating scenario-based experiments to make sure that you're able to overcome that when it comes?
Excellent. Awesome. Thank you very much. So you touched on them briefly, but I understand, Hope, that there's four specific areas that you recommend leaders look at and start to work on when looking to future-proof their workforce. Could you talk about those four and just briefly describe each of them?
So one of the first ones I would suggest that they look at is upskilling and reskilling. So we know that we have a lot of changes that are happening. We just mentioned AI. AI alone is an upskill, right, for most of us. So it's looking at those shifts in the economy, looking at technology, and looking at your organization to determine in what areas do we see a priority to upskill. And I would just, hint, AI technology is one of those areas that you need to be looking at. The second one is talent acquisition and retention strategies for the future. So we understand that we have all 5 generations right now working in the workforce. How are we going to keep them? How do we cater to all 5 with the shifting labor market? We have to be extremely strategic now in how we bring people into the organization. And then we have to foster the folks that are in the organization. How do we hone in on that knowledge that they have, and how do we share it amongst the organization to make sure that it stays? And the third one is really future proofing through data-driven decision making. We long gone are the days that we make decisions based on emotions and based on how we feel, right? There is value in analytics and people data to anticipate the workforce needs. We have to be able to track compliance. Like Mandy said, it is at minimum. It's the minimum you should have. How are you tracking your compliance though, to make informed decisions? So we have to be thinking about data-driven decision making. And last but not least, of course, building a resilient culture. You have to have a resilient culture. And I know people are like, what does that actually mean? and it's really having a culture where your team, your staff understands that change is inevitable. And we have to be thinking long term in order to be able to look at what those changes are going to be, what actions, what behaviors, and what norms will we put into place to ensure that we have a resilient culture to make sure we can overcome the change.
Perfect. Let's talk about those. I have a bit of an echo. I don't know if I want to clear that. Is that me? Okay. All right. Sorry about that. Let's talk about each of those in turn. But before we do, I just wanted to let people know who are joining us. If you do have any questions or comments, please go ahead and drop those in the chat. We have someone monitoring those, and we'll try to answer those, during this time permitting, of course. And if not, there will be another venue or facility that we can use to answer and address those as well in the future. So the first one, upskilling and reskilling. Some people, and Hope, this is probably a question for you. Some people, might hear this and think it's, let's just send our people to training courses each year, and we're covered, right? So, how would you think about it? How do you think about this? How do you think leaders should be thinking about upskilling and reskilling, and what does it really mean?
It has to be in the fiber of the organization. It has to be in the DNA, so to speak, of the organization. And what that could look like, you've already said what it doesn't look like. It's not sending your people to an annual training or conference. That is not what we would consider, let's just say, a culture of continuous learning. A culture of continuous learning looks like putting system and programs in place that are daily, that are valued by measured through metrics. So that actually looks like mentorship programs. And I know we've probably gotten away from that a lot in organizations. We don't always think we need it, but a mentorship program is key. That is passing knowledge to another person. It's having a younger person or a newer person, maybe even, put with a person that has more tenure in the organization. And now that knowledge gets to be passed on. We get to create the same type of work ethic and learning that this other tenured person has. It looks like on-the-job learning. We don't do that often enough, where we're actually sitting people, shadowing people with other people, cross-training. How does this person do this job? Leadership development. If you have a leader, they should be being developed constantly, right? There should look like development programs that are targeted. And I know Arquella at Alchemy has an amazing leadership program that companies sign up for. And that's what it looks like to have a culture of continuous learning. And it's also about, leveraging digital tools that looks like learning management systems that are put in place where your organization can tap in at any time and get those micro learning experiences. So that's what it looks like. It's not just, that annual conference. It just doesn't cut it anymore, guys.
Yep. Check some boxes. Did you get your training done? Check.
Yeah.
Mandy, for you. So, what are some of the potential risks that you see organizations facing in the coming change in administration next year? And, what role would you say upskilling and reskilling could play in addressing those?
Yeah, so I think, from an upskilling perspective, when it comes to things like what I didn't talk about, supply chain risk, we've heard a lot about, tariffs on international trade, right? Employers considering relocating factories or operations to different locations, different geographic locations, right? So upskilling and reskilling to ensure that those employees and those or who are operating or working directly in those new locations understand, right, the boundaries in which they can execute their ways of working and delivering services or quality standards, for instance, for products, right? Having that necessary training, as we've talked about before. Other opportunities, we've talked a lot about AI, and we've hinted a lot about AI and the importance of it as we move forward in 2025 and beyond, but really leveraging AI to assess a baseline of the existing skills within the workforce as of now, so that you can appropriately target, right, who are the candidates that we can offer upskilling, reskilling, cross-skilling to, right, to deliver on new ways of working as needs change.
Beautiful. Awesome. And Hope, I'm going to be asking you a culture question about this in a minute, but first for Arquella, as someone who regularly advises leaders on, workforce issues, what role would you say upskilling and reskilling can play in this and future-proofing their workforce? And, also, what role should they themselves be prepared in helping foster that culture as well?
Yeah, thank you, Steve, for the question. And yes, this is an area that we're passionate about on this side when it comes to leadership development and just making sure that organizations are equipped and with those skill sets, and to make sure that they are able to build resilient and future ready workplaces like we've been talking about. And so when we think about continuous learning and development, it is really thinking in it as a more strategic imperative. Definitely sometimes we do see where L&D, learning development, sits in HR, but then sometimes it's a separate function. Again, it is a strategic imperative, right, to really think about it from that lens. And so in the work that we do and Hope and Mandy, when we look at organizations who are really investing, and it is an investment in your people in order to further your organization, looking at these learning ecosystems, if you will, that we're able to really disrupt through the learning, whether it's communication, whether it's strategy, whether it's change management, but again, looking at what's needed for the organization so they're all the better for it, where they're able, again, to keep up with whatever the emerging trends are. And so when you think about the roles in regards to preparing cultures to really look at it as continuous learning, one, leaders should be modeling the learning behavior, right? And so when we do leadership development, we want the leaders to apply it, to live it, so their employees see it, as well as integrating that learning into daily operations, right? So it's not a one and done, but how do we live it every day in the work that we do? So creating psychological safety, right, for people to show up and be safe and be their authentic selves. It's being able to allocate the time and resources for development, right? That's another way that it could be a continuous learning opportunity. Implementing systems, right, that are able to capture and share that knowledge, whether it's a dashboard or a learning management system or whatever it may be. But again, having it where employees have access to it on a regular basis. And then also, again, thinking about how this is in alignment with the overall organizational strategic goals and objectives, where we're seeing, again, where it's really making a difference for organizations that really, again, tap into this being more continuous, right? So it's ongoing. It's, again, part of the DNA of the organization.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And Hope, AKA the Queen of Culture. You heard Arquella, you touched on this earlier, and then Arquella just mentioned it as well, resilient cultures. Now, I know we're going to talk about that, as our fourth pillar a little bit later on. But I think now might be a good time to touch on that since we just brought it up. But could you talk a little bit about what a resilient culture is and the role that upskilling and reskilling plays in building one?
Great question. And we have such amazing professionals on here. A lot has already been said about it, right? The resilient culture is able to withstand challenge and bounce back stronger from disruption. Ultimately, that's what it is. It's built on trust, and trust looks like you are setting up a system, strategies, they are in place, and your employees can trust that you've thought this through, that you have a plan, you have an action, and that they're going to be celebrated for the work that they do. That is what trust looks like. It's about adaptability. It's not about, hey, this is the way we've always done things. Resilient cultures, they're really adaptable. They're agile in a way. And so it allows for when change does come, we can adjust. We can adjust, in the moment. One, we've already thought about these things, right? We've already created strategy scenarios. We have already had those key roles in place, and everyone knows their place. And ultimately, it's about a growth mindset. You have to be in a mindset where you're willing to always be learning. That's kind of what comes to mind when I think of a resilient mindset. Like you never have it all together, and it's okay. That's a great place to be. Once you think you have it figured out, that's when we stop growing. So it looks like that. Employees feel empowered. They take initiative. The organization learns from failure. So something happens. It doesn't go quite right, a disaster happens, or maybe a policy comes through that we've missed. It is not punishable. It's how do we learn from this, right? How do we take what just happened and we come back stronger and we make sure that that doesn't happen again? It's a collaborative culture, especially in the face of uncertainty. So that's what it looks like. That's a resilient culture.
Beautiful. One thing I like to add to the discussion is, one of the challenges, of course, with dealing with change is, having time to respond to the change, because it seems like, things just, pop up, all the time. But I'm currently in a program at the University of Houston for Strategic Foresight, a master's program. And, Arquella mentioned this earlier. And, one of the things that that program teaches you is that change, even though we think change happens quickly, it actually happens slowly, for those who are paying attention, of course. And, there's a number of foresight practices, that we employ to try to anticipate or forecast change, not predict, but forecast change. So things like horizon scanning, where we're looking for signals of change, looking for drivers of change, et cetera. And, by doing that, we can be more proactive about what might be coming, from a long-term perspective. We're talking 10, 20 years out, for example, so that, we don't get caught off guard. And we've already thought through, potential responses, so that Hope, like you mentioned, our people can trust that we've come up with a plan, that we have an idea of how we're going to respond, regardless of the eventuality. So, something I would encourage all leaders to look more into, because we have this gem of a program here in Houston that's really talked about, actually. So, all right, thank you all for that. So our second pillar of the four that Hope shared with us is about data-driven decision-making. And Hope, let's continue with you. So what is data-driven decision making, and what are some of the roles they can play in future-proofing an organization's workforce?
Sure. So when it comes to data-driven decision making, it's really about analytics. It's the workforce's insights to create strategy from that. And if we put on our culture lens, in order to do this, you're going to have a culture of transparency and accountability. And we've already talked about trust, right? And what that means is, in order to get this data, you're going to have to do surveys. You're going to have to look at trends. You're going to have to look at, oh, wait, why am I experiencing so much turnover? And so in order to do that, you're going to have to go into a culture of trust. You're going to have to talk with your leaders, share insights openly. You're going to have to collaborate with the employees to address the change. You're going to have a lens where you are looking at it from a data-driven decision-making perspective. And so in order to do that, you have to have trust, because you're going to be pulling data and you're going to be making decisions. Some of the data that you're going to be pulling may not be favorable data to you. It might be, leaders aren't, fill in the blank. I don't want to put anything on your organization, but leaders aren't ... So how do we course correct that? Or, certain things are happening in the market and we're not capturing that. Whose responsibility is that to forecast those future skill needs? And we talked a lot about AI in this, but specifically even around that, the market is telling us that we need AI. We're going to be using tools to analyze and predict things. Whose role and responsibility in your organization? Who would that fall on, right? So that's what it looks like. And we can go into all kind of other things, diversity and diversity metrics to ensure that, certain metrics are happening within your organization, where we're looking at inclusivity. And I know we're going to get to that a little later. You want to look at patterns for your recruitment. So all of this is about, how do I set my organization up for future-proofing my workforce, and how do I use this data that I have currently to be able to forecast what I need to do in the future?
Nice. Thank you. Oops, there's an echo again.
We don't hear it. Do we hear it?
Good.
I don't hear it.
So Mandy, in terms of data-driven, approach, what role could predictive analytics play in future-proofing an organization's workforce from a risk management perspective?
Yeah, so Hope hit on a lot of the points. What I'll do is back up and say that this is also in the context of predictive analytics specifically, but generally, this is also an opportunity to accelerate the strategic advisory value of HR. HR has a wonderful opportunity here to act as a gateway for safeguarding business outcomes. It can do that by being at the front of the people problems, as we've talked about already, right? With ensuring that they're keeping to the ground, a pulse on the people, to ensure that the needs of the people are being adjusted based on the changes that are occurring in the external environment, but influencing the change in the internal environment. Predictive analytics is an ideal tool for anticipating potential risks. Hope mentioned, looking at trends. You can use predictive analytics, organizations can, by looking at historical data and trends to see how similar disruptions have impacted the org and its people in the past. From a workforce perspective, questions like, did productivity drop the last time? Did performance dip, that is employee performance? Distinguishing, again, this productivity and looking at the ability of employees to meet the expectations with their assigned duties in the midst of change. Did attrition or absenteeism increase? These are all things that will impact business outcomes. Did customer complaints rise, right, during this time? Were there particular customers doing the most complaining? Did complaints increase, this could be indicative of a management issue, right? If employee complaints are on the increase in the midst of change, or in otherwise, as Hope, the Queen of Culture, will tell us, this could also be a workplace culture challenge happening, right? If employee complaints are increasing and the disruption is exacerbating, right, those issues. So having the ability to have or get to a root cause analysis, right, to mitigate or manage future or similar risk is really the benefit that we're seeking when we're doing these predictive analytics.
Nice. Thank you. Arquella, how should leaders be thinking about data-driven decision-making, and the role it plays in future-proofing their organizations?
When you think about that, definitely a couple of ways, right? Is thinking about that mindset, right, for the employees. And again, it's a growth mindset, right, where people believe that they can definitely develop through determination and learning and feedback, coaching, conversations. And some things to really think about around strategies is how do we reframe, right, those challenges, right? Celebrating those learning moments versus just we failed and now what? And then also, how do we share those leadership success stories of how organizations are able to overcome some of those obstacles that maybe as it relates to the data points. And then also creating those learning opportunities, right? So a lot of times the data tells us what's needed. And so we take that and we create those opportunities where it might be a stretch assignment. It might be, how do we work better across different departmental functions or projects? How do we maybe look at having more mentorship or more coaching as well? And then making sure that we're able, again, to align it with our goals and objectives for the organization as it relates to, again, what is the data telling us? What else do we need to do differently to ensure, right, that this is, that we're able to realize it for sure.
Beautiful. Thank you. Continuing, a little bit more about, data and predictive analytics, et cetera. We're in Houston, Texas, and of course, we will be remiss if we didn't talk a little bit about the energy sector. So, Hope, I know you've done, quite a bit of work in that space. Are there any particular, unique challenges or unique opportunities even in the energy sector that, data-driven and data analytics could help address?
Absolutely. That's really a good question. So yeah, there is a unique challenge that oil and gas energy sector is facing. One, I mentioned that we have all 5 generations working now. So that means we have an aging workforce. At some point, the workforce is aging, and so folks will be leaving and retiring. And as Mandy has already talked about, using predictive analytics can help identify those roles so that you can avoid facing major turnovers when retirement happens, right? Having succession planning in place, using predictive analytics can allow for that. And then there's major technology shifts. And I do believe this is a very unique challenge for oil and gas and energy, because it's in the past hasn't been something that they've leaned on a lot. And now technology is it's a shift, it's a major shift. So as we move toward renewable energy and all of that, then analytics can identify which employees would then benefit from upskilling. So this is an opportunity. So there will be new technology advancements. So we need to be thinking now what those are. And how do we upskill then our employees to do that? But in order to do that, we do have to forecast. We have to look at what's going on. And then the thing that everyone knows about, we just have a talent shortage. We do. Most plants are in remote areas. And so when we look at our data, we're looking for recruitment and retention trends in certain areas. Those are going to be challenges for oil and gas and energy sector, just geographically. There's just, there's going to be a challenge, and there's always been a challenge, but it's going to be more of a challenge with the talent shortage. So I think for oil and gas, let's put on the culture hat really quickly. I think there's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to foster a culture of innovation. This is the time that innovation is going to be key, because oil and gas, again, in the past hasn't always, not all companies, but a lot of companies haven't always put on that hat of innovation. It's like, this is the way we've been doing it. And this is the time to challenge yourself, excel and cross functional skill training. Looking at how can we do this safer, how can we innovate, and how can we retain top talent using data analytics to do that would really help. And it's really about being proactive about problem solving and collaboration. That's going to be key for oil and gas.
Beautiful. Nice. And it's a culture crown, not a culture hat, by the way. Okay, Queens.
Oh, the crown. You're right. You're absolutely right.
That's
You need
right.
to get it. Get a
All right.
crown.
And I think that's a perfect segue into your third pillar, which is, excuse me, so talent acquisition and retention strategies for the future. Let's talk a little bit about that. So, I'll ask this for each of you. That term talent management is, such a ubiquitous term, and it feels like it's, kind of almost vague at this point in terms of what it means. So let's take a step back and let's just, recap. What exactly is talent management? What are some key aspects or goals of it? And then, of course, what role does it play in future-proofing your organization? And let's, take each of you in turn, Marquella, and then Mandy, and then Hope.
Steve, okay. So talent management, yes.
Mhm.
When you think about, it's really all about, again, how do we, manage our talent and create that employee experience, right? From before they start with the organization to all the way when they exit the organization. So it is really, again, how do we develop our talent and create that employee experience? And when you think about, we talked about, it's around strategic workplace planning, right? Hope talked about upskilling, right? Upskilling and right skilling, making sure that we have, the right talent in place for those positions. Also, when you think about talent management, do we have this dynamic performance management processes and systems in place? I like to tell leaders that performance management happens every day, right? Are we having real-time feedback with our team members? And Hope has mentioned, right, we have 5 generations in the workplace, and there's a study, it's probably been on a couple of years, where our younger generation, our Gen Z, they want feedback every day. So how do we make sure that we have real-time feedback systems in play? How do we focus on potential, right? Where we see our employees going? How do we make sure that we have agile goal setting systems and strategies set in place, again, aligned with the overall organizational goals? And then career pathing, right? We're having many conversations around career pathing and succession planning. And so making sure, again, that we have those systems in place so people know where they are able to ascend to, right, within the organization. And so when we think about talent management, it encompasses those areas. But now when we think about how do we make sure that we are putting, future proofing, it is risk mitigation, right? And so Mandy is all things risk management. So risk mitigation. And so that should be definitely top of mind when we think about future proofing our organizations. Capability building. How, again, do we make sure that we're cross-training, that we're upskilling, that we're right-skilling, that we are building our leaders so they are capable in their leadership roles, as well as, again, what's our retention strategy, right? As we have people who are exiting, how do we make sure that we're retaining, especially our younger generation, so they can take it on? And we're seeing where we're having coaching put in place, we're having mentorship put in place. So the transfer of knowledge is happening. So those are things that we can consider, right, when we think about talent management and future-proofing our organizations.
Great. Thank you. Mandy, your thoughts?
So talent management, I think, is also about living up to the employee value proposition, which is really about the benefits and the values a company offers to its employees or workers in exchange for their contributions, right? So as businesses continue to experience unprecedented disruption, some of which we can predict and some of which we just have to like brace for when it happens. There's a growing need to ensure that the employee value proposition evolves to keep pace with the impacts from disruption in order to safeguard business incomes. As Arquella said, it's all about the risk, right? And the risk is really, for me, is really about ensuring that that bottom line is being protected. Meanwhile, also ensuring that people are also being managed properly. And if talent management is going to be successful as a process, I think integrating those checks for disruption, right, when it happens, to ensure that we're also living up to that EVP or employee value proposition.
Nice. Thank you. And of course, last but certainly not least, Hope.
So, I mean, they've said everything, so they're so good. So I'll just add really quickly that I think one of the key aspects is really about aligning, when we think about talent management, aligning the individual growth with the business needs. Arquella talked about that younger generation that's in the workforce. I really believe that's going to be key. Talent management, I mean, for everyone, but specifically as we continue in business, obviously that younger generation is going to take the helm, right? And it's like, how do we align their individual goals, their growth, their career aspirations with our business needs, creating clear career pathways, and fostering a culture of inclusivity with them, and collaboration. I think that's going to be key for talent management. In terms of the future proofing, I mean, again, they've said it all, but when organizations prioritize their people as long-term assets, they are better prepared to navigate the disruption and weather the economic, technological changes, or even social changes. It's really going to be about the people and leaning into the people and what they need ultimately. That's how I view talent management. It's the need of the people aligned with your business needs.
Okay. Nice. Let's keep on that topic. Arquella, I'm going to ask you a question next about flexible workforce strategies, et cetera, in a minute. But Hope, you brought up an interesting point. How can organizations create agile talent management practices, that help with that, adapting, to the evolving needs of the workforce, et cetera?
Feedback loops. Let's have them. We need to hear from them. We need to hear from your workforce. Establish regular check-ins. I'm always asking leaders, what did your employees say? Especially when they're like, I have no idea what's going on. I don't know what they need. Ask them. And that's flexibility, that's responsiveness. Again, that's a culture. Having skill-based talent acquisition. Allocation. So that looks like it's shifting from a role-based to skill-based talent. So it's allowing employees to contribute across projects based on their abilities, not just their titles. And that's what we've traditionally done, but I believe we're going to have to get away from that in the future. And I mentioned this before, that cross-functionality, making sure that you're promoting internal mobility by encouraging employees to look at other roles, look at other departments. And we can't do this if we don't understand their career goals and their career aspirations. It's like, is there another department that you would thrive more in? Do you just have to live in this department, or can we use you in other ways? And I do also believe scenario planning. We do this internally here at Bow. We think about our clients' needs and different things that they're going to want, and how would we respond to that? So it's in your workforce planning, using predictive analytics to adapt quickly to the market changes. Go through scenario planning, have meetings that are based on if this, then what. And I think that that's a good way to remain agile in your talent management. Nice.
Thank you. It's so funny when we say, feedback loops and just go ask them. Why that's such an underutilized skill, I don't know, right? Even in change management, when we're trying to figure out, what do people need in order to be prepared for some change, et cetera. And, the mystery was always there. It's like, well, let's go ask them and find out, right? They know better than anyone else. So Awesome. Thank you for that, Hope. So, Arquella, there seems to be, it's been, I guess, since the pandemic, all this talk about work from home versus, the return to office mandates that we're now hearing about. What's your take on that? How should leaders be thinking about that, in your opinion? And, again, how does that impact, the leadership's team's ability to future-proof their workforce?
Yeah, that's definitely key, right? And so it's, it's a new normal. So, definitely being flexible and being adaptable, as we've, been seeing here. And so really, again, just taking a look at, how can we use project teams? Again, we have clients that are hybrid. And so the hybrid model definitely seems to be beneficial for organizations. And we're seeing more do that. And that we have some that they're all in back in the office. But again, they're having flexible schedules, for sure. But definitely it's a blend, right, of those flexible options that we're seeing, that when you think about having dynamic staffing models, it's project teams as well. So project-based assignments and stretch assignments, as I mentioned earlier. It's being able to have cross-functional teams that are able to pivot quickly, again, based on shifts and things that are happening, and again, giving them the training that's needed. There's also job sharing, right? That's still an option where, two people are sharing a job and, based on their skill sets and based on what the business needs. So we still see some of that as well as, again, it's a results focused option based on metrics. And again, what makes sense for the company based on their overall objectives. Then another thing that we're seeing on this side is how do we deploy our talent? And so there's, when I was in energy, and I see this now, where we had our own internal talent marketplace, if you will. And so being able, again, to deploy talent based on, again, business needs across different divisions, or across, again, what was needed based on what was happening, again, during these times. Another thing that you think about is, having those rapid deployment protocols, right? When we do have this internal talent marketplace, right? Having protocols around what does it look like? What does it feel like? How does this work? And then thinking about gig style, right? Internal assignments. And so people love the opportunities to stretch themselves and do more. And so as you're having these one-on-one conversations to understand where your employees want to go, being able, again, to give those type of internal assignments as well. And then finally, just making sure you have the technology integrations as it relates to the different way that we're staffing, so people have the real-time tools that's needed. Think about policies and procedures that are needed, again, for how we look at talent and the flexibility as well. And then managers, right? We're training our managers in order to be able to manage effectively and efficiently when we do have these number of flexible options for team members.
Perfect.
So that's some of the things that we're seeing, Steve.
Awesome. Thank you. And, Mandy, let's continue that thread. So how could flexible work arrangements be leveraged to mitigate risk?
So I think there are two key parts to this. One is from an attrition risk perspective. We're seeing, a lot of employees not being very receptive to those return to office mandates. And employees are saying, hey, if it's going to be this 5-day-a-week thing, and I've gotten used to, having the flexibility because I care for an elderly parent, or I, have other caretaker responsibilities, I'm going to go somewhere else. And so having those flexible work options can help to mitigate risk around attrition in that regard. But then there's also a valuable lesson learned during the pandemic from a recruitment perspective. And that is having remote work options allowed employers to address tight labor market conditions with labor shortages by employing people with disabilities who absolutely need those remote working arrangements and options, right? So I think, continuing to tap into those markets, like markets where people with disabilities who want to work, who are qualified and skilled to work, right? There's an opportunity with remote work. And then another risk, as things come up, disruption and other illnesses can happen. Ensuring that you're following ADA laws and compliance for accommodation requests. That's another risk, that you can manage with being flexible and creating flexibility within the workforce for people to continue contributing toward the organization's mission.
Nice. Beautiful. Hope, can you give some examples of some, flexible workforce strategies that an organization might employ?
Well, I believe it's all been said, but I will look at it from this perspective. I think in order to do everything that Arquella and Mandy has suggested requires trust and autonomy. What I mean by that is oftentimes we say, okay, fine, we'll put in a hybrid work model, but then we take on a micromanagement type of approach because we're not quite sure how to manage that type of flexible workforce. As Arquella said, it became the new normal, but there wasn't a lot of training or even culture work around how do we make sure that that team feels like they're still a part of the organization? How does the mission and the vision, translate virtually? And so I would say in all that they are saying to do, let's also focus on our culture and making sure that it is translating and we're not creating silos. We're not creating biases also within the virtual space. So that would be my offering for that. It's just making sure that we value a culture of trust and we are prioritizing that over micromanagement, which we tend to do. And like we said, from the continuous learning standpoint, that's another opportunity. That's another data metrics. Go look out there, see what's happening virtually, what other companies that are similar to yours are doing and or saying about how they do this flexible workforce strategy, and make sure that you are auto-correcting and you're focused really on your culture of flexibility, making sure that you can boost engagement, whether they're in the office or out of the office.
Yeah, you took the words out of my mouth. I was going to, weigh in on this a little bit as well, because, I hear this debate about return to office or work from home, et cetera. And, where should employees be? And to me, it's almost irrelevant. As long as you have good leadership in place, then it doesn't matter if you have employees at home or in the office. So to me, a leader that has a very crystal clear vision in terms of, where they're trying to take the organization, and also, very clear on what the current priorities are. That to me is, in my opinion, 90% of it. Anyone that works with me knows that I'm very big on leadership vision. Then of course, all the things you also talked about, right? Being able to communicate that in a certain way, employees that have the autonomy, and of course, the requisite skill sets. As long as you have those things in place, then in my opinion, it doesn't matter, where they're sitting in order to do their job. I learned that. I was fortunate enough to learn that during the pandemic, whereas at Chevron, right when the pandemic hit, and we had just switched over to, Agile, if you will. And, we almost, didn't miss a beat. It took about a week or two, for people to get over the shock of working from home with their kids and cats around them and everything. But after that, it was seamless almost. So we're coming up with just a few minutes left. I do think there's one more topic that's related to this that we should touch on, which is employee engagement. We touched on it a little bit when we talked about, go and talk to your employees. So let's just do this. Could each of you briefly talk about employee engagement? What is it? What role does it play? And what role does it play in future-proofing your workforce? And then we'll wrap up. Okay, let's start with Hope. Let's go ahead and continue with you.
Okay, not a problem. Great question. I love employee engagement. I do believe that companies that have engaged employees, Gallup study says, not me, that they're 20% more productive, and we know what that does for your profit. So it's the business case for it. But employee engagement is really about the emotional commitment that employees have. I mean, when I always think back to other generations and how engaged, let's say, our parents were, and there was loyalty with the company. We are missing that now. So it's really about that emotional commitment. And there is a business case. Obviously, if a staff is not engaged, if your workforce is not engaged, then you have higher retention rates. You struggle with productivity. You struggle with attendance. So it is a business case for it. But I don't want to take all the time up. You guys go.
And Arcola, let me ask you, more specifically, when we talk about employee engagement, how can diversity and inclusivity thinking be leveraged to promote employee engagement?
Yeah, just a couple things, right? Because we can be here like all day and night to talk about this, but no, I just won't do that. But what we think about truly when we think about diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging, it definitely it helps with us to transform our workplace cultures. But that mindset is one that we recognize and we value the different perspectives and experiences that our employees bring, which again increases engagement. It helps to create equitable access to opportunities, again, which impacts engagement levels. It helps to build those systems that support all employees to be successful, no matter who they are, what they look like, and all of that. And so again, that goes back to, again, increasing those engagement levels. And then finally, again, it's the active inclusion and decision-making, where people have voice. And the more people have voice, the more you get the buy-in, and the more, again, they show up and they have that sense of belonging. They feel like, again, they're ready to do what it takes to make sure that the company is successful. So those are just high level, right? But again, we can talk about it all day.
Yep, exactly. Right, Mandy, any strategies that an organization can implement to enhance employee engagement? Mandy, can you hear me? Okay.
So I'm on mute. So one thing I do want to say, I think Hope referenced the Gallup study. The 2024 State of the Workplace shows that low engagement has an $8.9 trillion impact on the global economy. That's the equivalent of 9% of GDP. And so when we talk about engagement, Hope's stat about the impact on the bottom line, this stat about the impact on the global economy, I think we say more, right, on why engagement is so important. And one of the things that we do at Tulip is we help organizations optimize the value of engagement data by showing not only the impact on people, but the impact on the business by digging into that data to uncover root cause analyses, right? For how you can show the direct connection where there are low engagement indicators, whether it's feedback, lack of feedback channels, not enough, not any at all, et cetera, how that is having a direct impact on business outcomes, productivity, performance, et cetera.
Wow. 8.9 trillion?
Trillion, with a T. Wow. Trillion.
Holy cow.
Yikes. Yeah.
All right. Well, I know we're coming up on time, so thank you all very much. Hope, where can people go if they want to get more information about this, learn more about this topic, carry on the discussion, et cetera?
So I encourage everyone to connect with us on LinkedIn. Arquella Hargrove is at Alchemy Consulting Group. Mandy Joseph is at Tulip Advisory Professional. It's cut off. I think that's consulting. And Hope is I'm at BoPro. And so in the coming month, in January, we will be hosting a free virtual event. So stay tuned. We will let you know more. I think we may do one more of these, but I want you to comment, even if you're not live, I still want you to comment. Let me know if you're in. Give us a thumbs up that you want to hear more. We'll reach out to you directly, making sure that we keep you in the loop. But we really appreciate the time that you've given us today, and you'll hear more from us.
Awesome. Thank you all very much. Thank you all,
Thank
panel.
you.
Have a great one.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.